price of freedom is death. We're coming to get our check.
Black first, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Afro Elite YouTube channel. I'm your host, Afro Elite. Before we get started, please make sure that you guys are subscribed to the channel by hitting that subscribe button, hitting the notification bell. That way you don't miss out on any future content. You know, some people get their notifications. Sometimes the notifications don't get out or you miss it or all of that. And you don't want to miss out on the future content. So hit that notification bell too. Also leave a like because this is going to be a very loaded, very educational broadcast that a lot of people are going to benefit from. We're going to kind of dive in some modern day issues, some history, education, all of that stuff. So it's important to hit the like button so the message can spread, so more people can see the channel, can see this broadcast, can, you know, subscribe so we can keep making content like this. I appreciate every single last person who's done so already. All right, and let me just make sure everything is good because sometimes things have issues. Okay. But we have people in here. A little tardy, a little bit. I was setting up some things because it was like some last minute things. I'm like, you know what? I want to put that in there. So it was a couple of last minute things that I decided to set up in there. So that's why. That's the reason. But we're not too late. Shout out to everybody in here. I see our brother. Who was the first person in here? Let me get to your name real fast. We have, let me see. Ro is in here. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you, brother. Ro, T-Step, the Hula Gang, J Cage, Sedonin Show, Concerned Black Citizen, Iron Will. I appreciate, and a lot more people is in here. We got a bunch of people piling in the room. So I appreciate DBS is in here. I appreciate every single last one of you all. Now, let me give you the reason why I decided to do this in the very, very first place. And the reason for that is the meeting I had. Shout out to everybody who came to the meeting I had in Chicago this past weekend. But we were talking about a lot of the discrimination as far as just the housing alone. All right. That made me think I haven't really broken down to me. I haven't broken down enough of just the housing issue that has gone on as far as the discrimination, because a lot of people, we understand that, yeah, we were segregated. We're still really segregated. Yeah, there was redlining and things like that. But throughout the American history and going back really around the Great Depression, which is like started in the late 1920s. So going back all the way there and then really to today's time, how the America's like like housing issues and stuff like that, how that affected us, how that helped them and all of that, like having everything done in a very chronological order so we can understand all of the discrimination and all of the reasons why we need reparations. So as I was thinking about this, I'm all like, you know what? This will be a good case for our reparations. And it also goes into a little bit of history because I'm all like, this can also show, because we all understand with the Fair Housing Act, you know, Dr. King was fighting for when he was going up to Chicago and other places that had crazy segregation. We understand he was doing that, but we don't really understand the depth of the issue. A lot of us, not all, but a lot of us don't understand the depth of the issue as to why that was such a prominent issue at that time, you know. So that's why I wanted to discuss that. Shout out to Iron Will for the $10 super chat. Thank you very much, good brother. He says, salute to you, brother. Thank you for all you do. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do, brother. Thank you for the $10 super chat. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing. I see you on Twitter or X. I guess it's called X now. I guess. Shout out to Ro for the $2 super chat. Sends Black Fist to you, brother. I appreciate your support. Thank you very much. I see our good brother Torian is in the building. So it's a lot of kind of reading and stuff like that. We're going to get into a lot of data we're going to get into. So I don't want to spend too much time monologuing before we really get started. So without any further ado, let's get started. This is going to be our first source. We're going to read this, make the screen as big as possible. Y'all know how I like to do it. And this is from NPR. This is recent information, but it came out in 2017. The problem has only gotten worse since this time. All right. But I saw this. I wanted to talk about this a while ago, but I decided to talk about this now because we have more current information that we can layer on top of this. All right. So it starts off saying the forgotten history of how the United States government segregated America. All right. We have to understand, and the reason why I wanted to do this is we have to understand that it was not just the state governments that were promoting segregation. See what happened? Actually, I'm wind up. What happens is a lot of times America plays this thing of racist hot potato. They play this game of the federal government doing something or the federal government allowing and promoting and maintaining some form of racism in this situation, like housing discrimination and segregation. They promoted that and allowed that to happen in the states because the state and local government, they were just all on board. Every form of the government was just all on board with that. So the state was like, okay, bet if you incentivize something I already wanted to do, then we're definitely going to do it. And you're just making it easier for me to do it. You're just stripping away the chance of conscience I would have not to do this. Same way with the prison system. We're not really going to get into that in this broadcast, but we talked about that before, how the federal government incentivized the prison sentence, the state prisons to be harsher, have harsher punishments, have longer prison sentences, okay? Have stricter laws, okay? They incentivize a lot of those things. So when you want to point the finger at, okay, who's to blame for this racist disparity, they are like, well, you know, the federal government is like, hey, well, that was the state government who did it. It wasn't us. I mean, look, they locked up in the state governments, right? But the thing is, the state governments, they look at the federal, they were like, hey, we just did what we was told to do. The federal government said they wanted it, so we did it. So you take your issue with them. It's this game that they play. And it's similar, it's a little similar to the game they play when it comes to reparations. All the federal government and the state government, they were all in on it. It's this big thing. All of the federal government, the state government, the local government, all of them are in on it. And what happens is that the state government be all like, oh, well, hey, you can't do that. Now, it was the federal government who allowed that. You know what I'm saying? You take your issue up with them. Why are you looking at us? You know, and the federal government, they try to point it at the state. So it's this little thing where they make it, and they do this on purpose, okay? Instead of working at this big one government thing, they do it on purpose. So when you try to point the blame and when you try to seek justice, they are like, oh, well, hey, you got to go to them. You got to go to them. So we have to understand, before going into this, we have to understand that the state and the local federal the state and the federal government, I mean, they were all in on this together. All right. All right, so goes on to say, it starts off saying, all right, in 1933, now, what happened, what was a big deal in 1933, this was during the Great Depression. We're not going to talk too much about the Great Depression because a lot of historians and economists and all that stuff, they kind of debate on what started the Great Depression. So it's a lot of theories about what started the Great Depression. Is not like one solid historical, this is what happened and everything else was false. It's a lot that was going on during that time in the Great Depression. But the only information you need to know now, for the sake of this broadcast, is that the Great Depression hit. A lot of Americans were losing their jobs, were losing their housing, okay? And a lot of businesses were closing down. It was a mass amount of that, where pretty much it was mass unemployment. And you know, if it was mass unemployment for white folks, it was crazy mass unemployment for black people, crazy mass foreclosures, on how people losing their houses, people losing their businesses. Mind you, too, I want you to keep this in mind, because they're not going to say this. This happened very recently after, a lot of you guys probably already know, this happened recently after Tulsa, Oklahoma, okay? The massacre of Tulsa, Oklahoma. That happened in 1921, okay? So this is black people, and that was a lot of different massacres around that time happening around that time. So it was a lot of black businesses that were being burned down and destroyed, a lot of black neighborhoods and towns that were being burned down and destroyed. And then bam, right after that, not even really a full decade later, you don't have any time to really recover, to get back up on your feet, because bam, now the whole country is going through the Great Depression. All right. Shout out to, hold on, before we continue, shout out to Dark Skin Brother 2. Thank you very much, brother. He says, bring it on out, my warrior brother. Thank you very much for your support. I appreciate it. For the $50 super chat, thank you very much. Definitely, we're it's gonna be loaded tonight. Definitely gonna be loaded tonight. All right, but let's kind of really get into it, because we got a lot, okay? Because this isn't the only thing. Okay, so starting over from the beginning, it says in 1933. Faced with a housing shortage, the federal government began a program explicitly designed to increase and segregate America's housing stock. Author Richard Rothstein says the housing program begun under the New Deal, were tantamount to a state-sponsored system of segregation. Okay, the New Deal. This is Roosevelt's solution to the Great Depression, where he was all like, okay, well, we'll come in, and because the economy's messed up, America, and we have to understand this, because they're not really going to break this down. What Roosevelt did, all right, he came up with a thing where he was all like, we're going to have different forces, different things set in place, so we can start public housing, so we can start FHA loans, which is really federally backed loans, so people can get money from the federal government instead of from the local bank government, because they didn't really have money at the time, because everybody was going through a really hard time. So you had different loans, you had different different organizations and stuff like that to help the American citizens get back on their feet. But the thing is that they were only helping white citizens. All right. So the FHA, which is the federal housing, it's the federal housing, FHA, Federal Housing Authority. I think it's the Federal Housing Authority. All right. Administration. Sorry. Federal Housing Administration. Also the HOLC, which is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. All right. Those things were really implemented under the New Deal. All right. So we get to know that. Thank you very much for the $20 super chat. Yo double CM23. Thank you very much for super sticker. Appreciate that. Much respect. Appreciate that. All right. Continuing. All right. And the reason why I'm stopping so much is because this stuff doesn't really break it down like that. It's like it's going in the middle of it. And there's a lot of context to all of this that we have to understand, because it's got information, but it doesn't have the context to it. So you can really get the full picture of it. All right. So it continues to say, the government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white, middle class, lower class families. It says white, middle class, lower middle class families. He says African Americans and other people of color. Of course, they're going to throw that. They just can't do it without an agenda. African Americans and other people of color were left out of the new suburban communities and pushed instead into urban housing projects. Now, all of this stuff happened really in the mid 1930s to the 40s, okay? And then they started building up housing projects. A lot of the housing projects and stuff like that really started getting developed in the 40s and stuff like that after the New Deal and all that. So we know. Then it continues to say, Rothstein's new book, The Color of Law, examines the local, state, and federal housing policies that mandated, okay? Not just recommended, not just allowed, not just permitted, but mandated segregation. He notes that the Federal Housing Administration, it was administration, not authority, Federal Housing Administration, which was established in 1934, furthered the segregation efforts by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African American neighborhoods, a policy known as redlining. At the time, the FHA was subsidizing. This is at the same time, the FHA was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for whites, with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. So what this means, y'all, is because the FHA is backed up by the federal government, so they have the money from the federal government. So what the federal government was doing, what the FHA was doing, they were paying, when they say subsidizing, they were paying people to build neighborhoods. They were paying people to build houses. They were paying people to build suburbs and neighborhoods and all that with the rule of, they were paying all that with the rule of, we're going to give you the money so you can build this neighborhood, so you can build these subdivisions, but you can't allow, the rule is we'll give it to you if you don't allow black people there. You can't, if you allow black people there, we're taking the money back. Don't allow any black people to live in the subdivision that we're giving you the money for. All right. That's what they're saying. So we have an image of what, because they don't really get into it in that much detail, but we kind of know, but this is an image. Okay. This is the image of redlining. So what they would do is, and they're going to explain this in a little bit, where the black people are. Now, this is the redlining. These are pictures of New York and Chicago. What redlining essentially was where they would circle red, or where the red spots were, they would say, okay, don't loan to where the red spots were, because they would be, the excuse is their high default rates. Default rates mean that these are people who are not going to be able to pay their mortgages. Okay, these, when you don't pay your mortgages, when you have your mortgage and you're unable to pay it, you fail to pay it, you skip on paying it, you refuse to pay it, whatever, they call that defaulting. Okay, the red is high default rates. So they would deliberately say, well, black people, they're just high default rates in general. This was their way to say, okay, we're just going to discriminate against all black people, so we're not going to give them loans for mortgages at all. All right. So getting back to the article here, and I'm trying to break it down so we can have full context of everything. So it continues to say, Rothstein says these decades old, and it was in a few years, these decade-old housing policies have had the lasting effects on American society. Quote, the segregation of our metropolitan areas today leads to stagnant inequality because families were much less able to be upwardly mobile when they're living in segregated neighborhoods where opportunity is absent, he says. If we want greater equality in this society, we want to lower we if we want a lowering of the hostility, I think that's a weird way of saying that. We want a lowering of the hostility between police and young African American men. I don't know why they would say lowering, but they said lowering of the hostility between police and African American men. We need to take steps to sorry, y'all. Desegregate. Sorry. I had to cough for a second. I had to pull back. All right. Make sure you guys, if you guys are here watching live, I appreciate you all. If you guys can share and leave a like, that would be very, very helpful. We're really doing a good job with this channel, coming over and overcoming the shadow ban that was put on this channel. All right. So I appreciate every single last one of you all. Continues to say, the Federal Housing Administration's justification was that African Americans bought homes in these suburbs, or even if they bought homes near these suburbs, the property value of the homes where they were insuring, the white homes that were, is the property values of the homes they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring would decline. So they said anywhere black people live, just if a black person lived in the neighborhood, the property value of all of the houses in the neighborhood, that would just decline because there's a black person living in the neighborhood. So you don't want black people living in the neighborhood. This also gave justification, not that they needed too much of that, but this also gave justification for white segregationists. Because they were like, well, I don't want my house going down. This was the justification for that. This was the justification for I don't want my kids to go to the same schools that black kids are going to. Kind of like Joe Biden, because Joe Biden was like that. Remember, kind of like that. All right, and therefore their loans would be at risk. All right. So all of this stuff is important to know. All of this stuff is important to understand. Let me see something. Tweet this. Now, it continues to say, there was no basis for this claim on the part of the Federal Housing Administration. In fact, when African Americans tried to buy homes in all white neighborhoods or in mostly white neighborhoods, property values rose because African Americans were more willing to pay more willing to pay for properties than whites were. Okay, so black people, because black people were didn't always misplace. You burned a bunch of black people's housing down. You took a bunch of black people's houses and property with eminent domain and flooding and all of this stuff. So black people wanted a place to stay. So if a house was around this time, let's say a house was $10,000 to buy this house, black people were more willing to pay about $12,000 to $15,000 for the house than white people were. All right, so that would raise the property value, but they would lose out. The FHA would lose out on money, risk losing out on money to be racist. It continues to say, simply because those housing supplies was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. So the rationale that the Federal Housing Administration used was never based in any kind of study. It was never based on any reality. So the Federal Housing Administration just made that up, and the states went along with it. Okay, the states were willing to lose out on money too, because the states supported segregation just as much as the federal government. All right. It continues to say, the term redlining comes from the development by the New Deal, by the federal government of maps, and I just showed you guys of every metropolitan area in the country. And those maps were color coded by first the Homeowners Loan Corp. Okay, we talked about that earlier. That started with the New Deal as well too. And then the Federal Housing Administration, and then adopted by the Veterans Administration. All right. Now, mind you, all of this stuff is going on too. What the article is not going to talk about is this stuff is going on as well as the New Deal. Because this stuff is going on. I'm going to pause it real quick. This stuff is going. Hold on. Take this off. This stuff is going on really in the mid 1930s to early 1940s. Okay. So in the early 1940s, that's when it was the end of World War II. So that's when a lot of veterans was coming back, and they were getting, Roosevelt signed the New Deal. I mean, not the New, he signed the New Deal, but he also signed the GI Bill. So what the GI Bill did was the GI Bill said, okay, well, for fighting, for serving America, for serving the country, what we're going to give you all, we're going to give you the GI Bill, which really was an incentive, which an award. So you guys get housing. We're going to give you housing. We're going to give you grants for businesses. We're going to provide you with education. We're going to provide you with, coming back unemployment benefits, all of these benefits that white veterans were getting coming back from World War II, that black veterans were not getting at all. Okay, so this talks about the New Deal, but it doesn't really talk about the GI Bill. So it was a whole bunch of white people just getting stuff. They were being assisted by the government. Now they tell us that we just need to get a job, that we just need to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We just need to work hard. We need to stop our victim mentality, stop living in the past, and persevere like everybody else has, because there's nothing holding us back. Nobody's restricting us. Racism is a thing of the past now. All right. They were getting all of this stuff at the same time. So it's important to know this stuff, because when you look at this stuff and you think about the New Deal, you might not remember this stuff was happening at the same time that the GI Bill was happening. All right. So let's continue. Where was I? Okay. Start right here. All right. And anywhere where African Americans lived nearby were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky to insure mortgages. Okay. And I just showed you guys an example. I'm going to show you one more time. This was the example of that. All right. So if you know about if you're from New York or know about New York, or you're from Chicago, know about Chicago, these are where black people were living especially during the early days of redlining. And they were all like, okay, well, everywhere is red. Don't loan to those places. Okay. So not only is it close to black neighborhoods, it was close to black neighborhoods as well too. All right. So going down, it says it was in something called the Underwriting Manual of the Federal Housing Administration, which said that, quote, incompatible racial groups, which is black and white, incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. Scrolling down even further, it says, in one development in Detroit, the FHA would not go ahead during World War II with this development unless the developers built a 6 foot high cement wall separating his community from a nearby African American neighborhood to make sure that no African Americans can even walk into that neighborhood. They literally built walls, cement walls. Okay, the FHA told them, hey, you want this money, we need you to build a wall to make sure black people, not only black people can't live there, black people were not even allowed to walk in those neighborhoods. Now, a lot of this was going on. There was a lot of sundown towns and all that stuff. So this was really something that was not fought against because they were already on this type of energy. It's just the federal government just ensured that, hey, everybody got to get on the same page, which wasn't really difficult because that's pretty much the page that the nation was on at the time anyway. All right. Then it continues to say, the underwriting manual of the Federal Housing Administration recommended that highways, now this goes into the Highway Act. The Highway Act happened around that time as well too, that the highways be a good way to separate. Now, when they started the Highway Act, I'm sorry for pausing, but this stuff doesn't put it into context the way it should be. When they started the Highway Act, they was all like, oh, the Highway Act, we're doing this because they weren't talking about, oh, this is for segregation. Oh, the Highway Act, we're doing this because this is going to be great for the economy, okay? Because a lot of the jobs, they were downtown because a lot of, around that time was a lot of factories and stuff like that still going on. A lot of factory and manufacturing and shipping and stuff like that. That stuff would be going on in the city, not in the suburbs. There wasn't a lot of stuff in the suburbs. So they were all like, oh, to help the economy and the infrastructure and all that stuff, we're going to build this big highway, and the highway will go from the suburbs to downtown and all that. And that's going to help everybody. But what they did was the highway is like barriers. They knew, okay, the highway is like killing two birds with one stone, because the highway will use that. Well, of course, we'll use that for traffic, but we'll also use that as barriers to really make sure that we keep this segregation stuff on lock. So there's no mix up. Black folk don't get to slip into the white neighborhoods. There's no mix up at all. We're literally they literally use highways as barriers. Not only that, the Highway Act destroyed a lot of black businesses because they would just completely it was black businesses around that time. They would say, oh, y'all got to go because we're building this highway right here. Or they would build a highway right next to the business that would kind of mess the neighborhood up, that would kind of mess the traffic and people coming up. So a lot of the Highway Act destroyed a lot of black businesses as well too. So they was all like, oh, this is perfect. It's a racial barrier. All right. It's helping these white folks get back and forth to work, and it's destroying y'all little businesses, the ones that we didn't burn down and bomb and flood and take with eminent domain. So, oh, this is perfect for us. And the federal government subsidized all of this. Okay. So it's very important to have all of these things in context, because they're not going to put it in context. So we have to understand all this. All right. Continues to the, where was it? Okay. A good way to, so we're right here, right? It says, so this was not a matter of law. It was a matter of government regulation, but it also wasn't hidden. So it can't be claimed that this was some kind of de facto situation. Right, so it wasn't, and then everything they do, they'd be like, "Oops, how did this disproportionately harm black people? I can't believe it. We didn't do this on purpose. Definitely not. Of course not. This was in the plan." Every time they create some type of act, every time they create some type of thing that always disproportionately harms black people, when they put lead pipes in places where black people live, all of these things that wound up crazily affecting black people and harming black people, they've been known what the result of what they're going to do is going to, they know that. All right. That's why they do it. Okay. They have economists way before they start financing anything, way before they start signing anything, way before they start building any of the stuff. They already know, okay, this is the long game. They already knew what the Highway Act was going to do, despite the fact that they lied. And they were like, oh my God, guys, how did this happen? This is crazy. Sorry. They already knew that. They knew when they put in these damn dangerous lead pipes in places, they already knew what the long-term effects of that was, which is why you don't see stuff like that happening to white neighborhoods. You don't see the federal government putting some type of construction someplace and it's killing off white people. Like, oh, I'm sorry, white folks, and didn't know. You don't see that happening, but you see it happening to black people because all of that is deliberate. All right, it's not an accident. Now it continues to say regulations that were written in law and published in the underwriting manual are as much a de jure, I think that's a French term, a de jure unconstitutional expression of government policy as something written in law. All right. So this is the reason why is because they'll say, oh, things have to be separate but equal under the Constitution. So separate but equal, they can't say, okay, we're just not going to give loans to, well, as the federal government, we just can't give loans to black people. If we help white people out, we have to, but based off the Constitution. We can't do that based off of white people and black people. So what we're going to do is we're going to create dangerous and harmful allegories around the black neighborhood and say this is our reason for not supporting and not funding that. What we're going to do is we're not going to say, oh, we just don't loan to black people. What we're going to do is we're going to say, well, black people, you're at high default risk. So we're not going to give you loans because we don't want you to default on your loans. You know, so despite the fact that that's not true, despite the fact that there's no data and study to verify that, we're just saying, we're white and we say so. So we're just going to say that. And that's going to be our excuse not to give you loans. All right. So it continues to say, today, African-American income on average are about 60%. Now, mind you, this article came out in 2017, are about 60% of average white incomes. All right. But African-American wealth is about 5% of white wealth. Most middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 5% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to the federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. African-American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s and even into the 60s, because remember, the Fair Housing Act, which they passed 1 week after after they assassinated Dr. King in April 11th, 1968, that was really at the end of the 60s. So it was really the 40s, because this stuff happened in really the mid 30s. So it really starts from like kind of the early, because he started it, all of this stuff, it started in the 1933, and then it really started rolling out in 1934. So this really started in like the early to mid 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then almost the entirety of the 60s, all the way up until 1968, where the Fair Housing Act was passed. All right. So you know that. So we have the dates correct. So the 40s, 50s, and even the 60s by the Federal Housing Administration gained none of the equity appreciated that whites gained. So the Dallas City development south of San Francisco and Livingston, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Livingston, or any of the others in between across the country. Those homes in the late 40s and 50s sold for about twice national median income. They were affordable to working class families with an FHA or VA, which just stands for Veterans Administration mortgage. African Americans were equally able to afford these homes as whites were, but were prohibited from buying them. Today, those homes sell for 300,000 or 400,000 at the minimum, six to eight times national median income. All right. So pretty much what this is saying is that back when whites were getting the loans, when whites were getting the loans and getting the mortgages, black people could afford those homes, but black people were not allowed to get those homes. So by the time, now imagine this happening for a good 30 plus years. So 30 plus years of them gaining wealth, 30 plus years of all of that equity specifically and exclusively to the white community. By the time the Fair Housing Act was passed in the late 60s, when black people went to go start getting those homes were 6 to 8 times the price they were when white people were buying them. All right. I'm going to wrap this up, and then we're going to get into a little bit of the details after that. All right. Let me see, where was it? All right, right here. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act that said, in effect, okay, African Americans, you're now free to buy homes in Dallas City or Livingston, which were really white neighborhoods, okay? And they're using those as examples. But it's an empty promise, because those homes were no longer affordable to the families that could have afforded them when whites were buying into those suburbs and gaining the equity and the wealth that followed from that. All right. Now, meanwhile, they were burning black houses. All of the times where they were not allowing black people to buy houses, where they were discriminating, the federal, state, and local government, all of these governments were discriminating against giving mortgages to black families. At the same time, all right, they were burning black houses down. All right, a lot of this was going on during the time where they were also, and to put this into context, there was also a lot of public housing. So because black people were not allowed to buy a house, for the most part, black people were not allowed to buy a house, or whatever the case may be, or the house didn't have the equity that it needed to. A lot of the poorer black people, they went into public housing. All right. So just remember that, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Continues to say, the white family sent their children to college with their home equities. They were able to take care of their parents in old age and not depend on their children. They're able to bequeath wealth to their children. None of those advantages occurred to African Americans, who for the most part were prohibited from buying homes in those suburbs. Now, we're going to pause this because I got to put everything into context, all right? Thank you, John. I was just about to appreciate you, John. I was just about to get him out of here. John is on it. I was just about to get Torian. I was about to say, well, thank you, John, but John was the troll. Thank you, Torian. I was just about to get him out of here. Now, right? Now, here's how they were. This is okay. Break this down. How they were able to afford certain things. When you want to go to the bank and you want to take out a loan to take your kid to afford college for your kid, which was much more affordable back in the day, but that's another story, or to start a business, okay? What people would do was they would have things called collateral. Collateral is, this is my asset. I have this. This is you would get it appraised. Okay, this is going to be my collateral. I'm going to take my appraisal and what this is worth to the bank and say, okay, I'm asking you for a loan. If I default on this loan, you're going to take my house as collateral. So depending on how much the house was worth, and they would set that up based off the interest. So they would allow, the banks would loan a lot of white people money using their homes as collateral. And the thing is, the higher the wealth in the neighborhood, because the neighborhood, you would put a school in the neighborhood, the housing taxes that would go to the public schools, the better the public schools, the higher the wealth is, the higher the value of the house is if the house was in a neighborhood next to a school. And so it would kind of go in this cycle. And the higher the wealth was in that neighborhood, the better the loan they would be able to get to either take their kid to college, to either start a business, to do a bunch of stuff, or if they fell on hard times or whatever the case is. Black people weren't able to do this stuff at that time. Black people were not able to do that. So keep all of that stuff in mind. They will use collateral. Now, the article is not going to talk about that, but they were able to use collateral as like a safety net for them. All right. And the longer they had the house, especially if the neighborhood was nice and the suburbs were nice and kept together, the higher the house was. So the bigger the loan they were able to get. All right. So it says, does deserving something is like saying you. Now, it continues to say, going down here, public housing began in this country for civilians during the New Deal, and it was an attempt to address a housing, I was about to say shortage. It is shortage. Shortage. It wasn't a welfare program for poor people. During the Depression, no housing construction was going on. Middle-class families, working class families were losing their homes during the Depression when they became unemployed. And so there were many unemployed middle class, working class white families. And this was the contingency that the federal government was most interested in. All right. Now, mind you, all of this stuff, they were also burning down a whole bunch of black not just houses, neighborhoods, entire neighborhoods, whole black Wall Streets and economies, dust, burned to ashes, flooded, just destroyed. All right. It continues to say, and so the federal government began the program of building public housing for whites only in cities across the country. The liberal interest in some Roosevelt administration officials led them to build some projects for African Americans as well. All right, so there were some people saying, "Oh, build there. You got to have something for black people. You can't have a whole bunch of homeless black people." This is around the time where Cabrini Green, for the folks in Chicago, this is around the time when that stuff was built up. All right, when they were building those things up. Okay, so they were building housing projects for black people. But the thing is, with the housing projects that they built for black people, they built the housing projects for black people, and they didn't take care of them. They abandoned them, and they let the housing projects pretty much run down. All right. Continues to say, but they were always separate projects. They were not integrated. All right. The white projects had large number of vacancies. Black projects had long waiting lists. Eventually, it became so conspicuous that public housing authorities and the federal government opened up the white design projects to African Americans, and they filled with African Americans. At the same time, industries was leaving the cities. African Americans were becoming poor in those areas. The projects became projects for poor people, not for working class people. they became subsidized. They hadn't been subsidized before. And so they became virtual slums that we come to associate with public housing. All right. So instead of it being like working class people trying to get up on their feet, instead of this becoming places where plumbers and, people who had trades and were in the working class, this came for people who were really in the below working class, people who had almost no money. All right. And a lot of that fit with poor black people. So it continues to say the vacancies in the white projects were created primarily by the Federal Housing Administration program to suburbanize America. And the Federal Housing Administration suburbanized mass production builders to create subdivisions that were, quote, white only. And they subsidized the families that were living in the white housing projects as well as whites who were living elsewhere in the central cities to move out. Okay, this was around the time when white flight was happening, to move out of the central cities and into the white only suburbs. Okay, so this was a lot of, we have to understand a lot was going on at this time. This was when white people were living in the cities, and then with the Federal Housing Administration, and they were starting to build suburbs next to the cities. This was before the Highway Act, really next right outside of the cities. Okay, this is so they can have easy access to the cities, but they don't live in the city. All right, so the Federal Housing Administration, they were building this stuff, but they were only building this for white only places. So they were building a lot of the projects in the city area and right outside the city area. This is why you see kind of right outside of the city area and a lot of these places like Chicago or New York or Philadelphia, San Francisco. A lot of these places, they have nice suburbs, and then in the cities you'll have areas where projects were. Now a lot of these projects, some might be up, some might not be up, but you have a lot of these housing projects that were up in the cities where white people were leaving, because white people were living in those projects too. But because of the Federal Housing Administration, they were all like, okay, well, we'll take the white people out, have the black people live in there. The black people, will allow that to become the ghetto. They created the ghetto. They created the projects. They allowed that stuff to happen. They created that. They crammed a bunch of black people in those things, and the housing was supposed to be, okay, we'll do this, and then we'll put jobs in the area. A lot of this stuff will be temporary, so people can really get up on their feet, and then they can start buying houses. They were doing this. Meanwhile, white people, since the 1930s, white people were gaining wealth and equity through their housing. Okay, white people were passing their houses down through the New Deal and the GI Bill. Were passing their houses down to their children, creating generational wealth, while black people were stuck in the projects that they designed and they neglected deliberately for the purpose of turning these projects into ghettos. So all of the ghettos are designed to be this way. So when they say pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, we have to understand the history of all of this stuff, because they wanted this to happen. They made this happen the way it did. All right. So it pretty much ends there. So I'm just read this off because we have more stuff, and then it's going to get into kind of like the numbers. All right. Where was it? I'm just start where okay, right here. So it was the Federal Housing Administration that depopulized public housing of white families, while the public housing authorities were charged with the responsibility of housing African Americans who are increasingly too poor to to pay full cost on their rent. All right. Now, a lot of this stuff, before we get into it, a lot of this stuff happened. Then you can imagine now, to take into all of this stuff, take into the context of, okay, we're in public housing. They're not doing anything to pay for the public. They're not doing anything to take care of these people. We're losing jobs. They're removing a lot of these jobs away from people. They're restricting a lot of these jobs away from people. Take that into factor when you talk about the crack epidemic. Now take into factor the fact that they're putting crack into Black communities. All right. With all of that stuff that happened, with all of that stuff that went on. Now, that was after the Fair Housing Act or whatever, but take into all of that stuff. Take into factor as well, too, that they pretty much restricted Black people from staying other places. And then they were all like, okay, if you live with a man, if you're married, we're not going to give you these Section 8 stuff. Now, that happened a little bit later, but all of that history factors into each other. All right. So it's very deliberate. Our condition is very deliberate from the white supremacists. All of this stuff. Now, they tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. They tell us just work hard. They tell us just forget about all of the stuff in the past. Slavery was such a long time ago. And the reason why it's good for us to know this history, because this history happened way after slavery. This history happened way after the 13th, 14th, and 15th. All of this stuff, this history happened way after that. All right. So this was a lot of what Dr. King was fighting for. All right. Because he was a big proponent of fair housing. That was one of his main things. That's why a lot of his stuff, he was partnering in Chicago because of the really, really bad segregation that was going on. Okay. Because he's like, okay, white people already had a whole bunch of wealth through slavery. Then when white people are stuck, the federal government is coming in to save the day for white society. But they're saying, okay, we'll save you as long as you don't help Black people. And they were like, okay, cool. We don't want to help them anyway. So they were doing that, and Black people were getting poorer at the time. Meanwhile, too, because they're not going to factor all of this stuff together. Meanwhile, too, you still had the KKK that was very active during that time. Meanwhile, too, you had Black people, they leave their house to go to work one day. They come back, their house is just burned down. Black business owners just getting lynched all throughout the country. All of this stuff is happening at the same time. All right. Remember, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that happened in the 1920s. That happened only 10 years before the Great Depression. So Black people didn't even really get a chance to recover before all of that stuff happened. A lot of that stuff where they were just taking land, in Bruce's Beach. They were just taking land in New York. Do you guys know that the Central Park? Black people had that. That was Black people who had all that stuff. They were like, hey, give it to us. And the dominant society took that with eminent domain. So they were taking land. They took it with eminent domain. They were taking land away from Black people. And then when the Great Depression happened and everybody was just kind of out of luck, the federal government under Roosevelt came to save white people. All right. And Black people had to pretty much find a way to make it through. So all of that stuff factors into each other. So now we're going to get into more recent things. All right. But actually, a little bit before we do this, because this is going to skip through a little bit. I also want to talk briefly about the housing crisis in 2008. All right. So right around the time after the Fair Housing Act was passed and Black people started to, buy houses, a lot of that Black people really started to buy houses and stuff like that in like the 80s, 70s, 80s, around that time when things start to get, more fair, more even, right? So in 2008, and this isn't going to be a full broadcast of why the housing crisis happened, but essentially, so we know, in the early 2000s, there was what they call a housing bubble. There was a lot of houses going on. So around 2005, 2006 or whatever, what banks were doing is, because they had so many houses and people were trying to buy houses, they were giving mortgages to certain people. They were getting those mortgages, collecting those mortgages, and they were selling like stocks and pieces of those mortgages to investors. The price of housing went up, so investors were gaining more money through their investment when they were buying bundles, kind of, forgot the term, where they were buying bundles of the mortgages. All right. So with that happening, greed is going to kick in. So what they decided to do is they were like, okay, now we're going to give out mortgages to people who really wouldn't qualify for these houses. So when you apply for a mortgage, they look at your credit history, your job history, all of these other things. So what they were doing was they were having this thing called subprime mortgages. So instead, they were selling nice houses, middle class houses, to working class people who really couldn't afford that. All right. And what they were thinking is, we want as many mortgages as possible so we can start selling off pieces to the bundles to investors. So they were just making a lot of money. And the thing is that they were all like, okay, if you, what they call, default on the loan, the mortgage, we're just going to get the house back. So you're going to pay this money. If we give you a mortgage, no matter how much you pay, unless you pay the full amount of the mortgage, if you default, we get the house. So if you default, we get the house, we'll sell it to somebody else. So all they just greedy, just gluttony, just eat food, not food, but money after money after money. So much so they wanted more mortgages at this time. And with the subprime mortgages, they really started targeting black families with the subprime mortgages and all of that as well too. Then what they did, they went after like the real lower class people, because they wanted all these mortgages so they can start selling off to their investors, right? So what they started to do, they implemented this thing called predatory lending. So what they'll do is they'll be all like, we're going to completely ignore your resume. We're going to give you the loan anyway, knowing that more than likely you're going to default on the loan. They're not even doing any background checks at this point, because they're all like, it doesn't matter if you default on the loan. We're going to get the house. We're going to sell the house to somebody else. You're going to give us whatever you have down, however much mortgage you can pay. You're going to pay that. We're going to get that. All right. The investors are getting that. Also, too, you had housing insurance companies. They were making a whole bunch of money at this time. Everybody had their hand in the pot, okay? The federal government knew all about this. Everybody had their hand in the pot, because you had insurance companies. They were all like, okay, well, housing insurance, a lot of people are buying houses, so a lot of people are getting housing insurance just in case they default. So they were making a whole bunch of money at this time too. All right. This stuff happened really in like the 2005, 6, or around 2005 and 6. All right. Now, they were okay. They felt safe, because when a person who they felt could not, who were going to default on their loan, sometimes they set it up that way. Sometimes what they would do is they would be all like, okay, if you pay this much for your mortgage a month, after 6 months, the rate changes. You know how sometimes when it comes to phone bills or something like that, they be all like, pay $20 a month for 6 months, and then they won't tell you nothing else. And then in the fine print, they'll be like $20 a month for 6 months. You'll be like, oh, $20 a month for 6 months, that's decent. And then after that, okay, now you got to pay $90 a month. You know what I'm saying? So it'll jump. It'll have this big spike after that. So they know that, like, okay, you'll pay this up to maybe 6 months or something like that. But then when the initial price that we get you to sign off on, when that starts jumping and you don't have the income to reach the mortgage that we're charging you for, you're going to default. So that's fine. But we're doing this because on paper, because most people ain't going to read through the fine print. On paper, you look like, hey, I get to have this house. I can't really afford another place, but this looked like a good deal. I'm just going to sign it anyway. So a lot of black people, unfortunately, are signing off on those predatory lending. Okay, the banks were predatory lending to a lot of black people. So what really happened is around 2007 and 2008, what the banks did not calculate was that a lot of people, they knew people were going to default. But the thing is, around 2007, 2008, a bunch of people started defaulting very fast. Okay, the foreclosure rate, okay, was extremely high, and it was higher than they could make up for. So a lot of places started foreclosing at the same exact time, and they couldn't really make up for that. So they were foreclosing, which had the investors like, okay, they were foreclosing. All right. So the investors started pulling out. So the investors started pulling out. A lot of banks, the banks were starting to lose money. Some banks were starting to go bankrupt. Then a lot of businesses, corporations, because they all had money in the stocks, because the banks were bundling these up and then selling the stocks to different corporations, to different investors, and everybody was making money off that. Then when people started foreclosing at the same time, people were starting to panic and people were starting to pull out at the same time. Then the insurance companies that had housing insurance, they were all like, hey, we gonna be real, we don't got the money for y'all. So the insurance companies they didn't even give nobody no money. They just closed down, because what they did not calculate all of these millions of people. They didn't calculate all of these people coming in to get their policy at the same time. They didn't have the money for that, so they just crashed. So nobody got them. They were paying insurance, but they didn't get their insurance back. So all of this stuff happened. It was a lot of unemployment at this time. Okay, because corporations, there was a lot of shrinkage. So, okay, you had to start laying people off because you're going bankrupt. You have to start laying people off. You have to start cutting people's hours down. You can't be hiring people, okay, because y'all was investing in this dirty money. That's what it was. Y'all was investing in that dirty money, right? It was a lot of people who were losing their houses, all right? So then that's when Obama became president. And Obama saw that there was a lot of banks that were going to close down. So what Obama did, Obama had the federal government give money to bail out the banks. But there was a whole bunch of people, and around this time, a whole bunch of people had to kind of go back to public housing, or had to stay with a family member, or relocate, or whatever the case is, because of the predatory lending that was going on. Now, keep that in mind, that this is happening before I read this article, because this article doesn't factor all of that stuff in. All right. All right. So, okay. Now, it says right here, who benefits the most from home ownership over the past 10 years? All right. Now, this came out recently in 2013. All right. In April. Now, it says, home ownership has long been considered one of the best paths to building long-term wealth. A home provides safety, a tappable source of income, a value that can be passed on to future generations. Okay, a tappable source of income. That means, you can use it to pretty much you can use it to get, you can use it as collateral. That's what that's what a lot of them were using at the time. Oh wait, actually, before we do that, I almost didn't see this. Our good brother Black Logic says, brothers 100, thank you. The $50 super chat, thank you very much, brother. I appreciate you, brother. FBAB1 all day, thank you very much, brother. I appreciate your support. Now, so we talked about collateral as well too. So they were able to use this for collateral. They were able to pass this down. They were able to sell this. They were able to sell these homes. They were able to get other homes, and then they were able to become landlords because they own the property. So they were able to do a lot of this stuff that Black people were restricted from. This is why I took my time to break down a lot of this stuff earlier on, because they miss a lot of the important details. All right. So they were able to do this. So they were able to get generational wealth. All right. So it says over the 10-year period between 2012 and 2022, the value of a median price home in the U.S. increased by 190,000, or a gain of 19,000 per year on average, according to a new study by the National Association of Realtors, NRA. All right. A typical homeowner's net worth is 40 times higher than that of a renter, the NRA says. All right. So that's very, very important to know. All right. This analysis shows how home ownership can be a catalyst for building wealth for people from all walks of life, said Lawrence Yin, chief economist at NRA, in an executive press. Hold on. This goes. But this route to wealth is not necessarily fair or evenly distributed. Some owners see their home value increase much faster than others. While certain groups were much more likely than others to own houses in the first place. All right. Then it continues to say, even though the report showed homeowner wealth increase across the board, there are significant differences among homeowners from different income levels. Then it goes into the numbers. All right. This is why I wanted to read you kind of the backstory before we got into the numbers, so we can have everything into proper context. It says low income households, defined as those who earn less than 80% of the area median income, gained 98,900 in net worth from home appreciation alone over the past 10 years. Middle income households, those who earn more than 80% and less than 200% of the area median income, gained 122,100 in wealth over the same period. And now this is 10 years. Okay. Keep that in mind. All of this is from 2012 to 2022. High income households earn more than 200, earn more than 200,000, why I'm saying 200,000, 200% of the area median income gained 150,800. All right. The report also points a big disparity among different ethnicities when it comes to home ownership rates. The Black home ownership rate was 44.9% by the end of 2022. The white home ownership rate was 54.5%. The Asian American home ownership rate was 61.9%. The Hispanic American home ownership rate was 48.5%. Now, I want to show you guys this as well too. They say black and brown, right? Black people and brown people. When they say brown, they mean Hispanic. When they say black people and brown people, we got a lot of the same issues. They always are tying our issues together. But anytime you actually look at the numbers, when you look at the wealth, when you look at the money, when you look at the data, black people are always worse off than Hispanics are. Yet they are always tying black issues and Hispanic issues. They are always making it seem like black and Hispanics are in the same boat. But every single time you look at the numbers, you always see that black people are in a worse position than Hispanics are in no statistic that you look at. All right. Now, when it comes to home ownership, not when it comes to wealth, not when it comes to employment, not when it comes to prison sentences, now when it comes to education, now when it comes to any of these things, do you see Hispanics in a worse position than you see blacks? Everywhere, in everything that you can look at the numbers, you always see black people are in the worst position than everybody else. But when it comes to the recovery, or when it comes to repairing this, they always put these minority, people of color, all lives matter policies, despite the fact that it is the black people suffering that makes the people implement these policies in the first place. All right. So that's very important to note. It continues to say the large disparities in in ownership rates point out the barriers that some racial/ethnic groups face when it comes to building wealth and being able to pass those gains onto their children. What's more, through all what's more, all though all ethnic groups saw an increase in ownership during the decades ending in 2022, growth among black households lagged behind that of all other ethnic groups. All right. It continues. It continues to say, I'll just read this. Net worth increased by race over the last 10 years. Over the last decade, homeowners gained on average of more than 100,000 in home value across all racial groups, right? Considered in the study. Here's the breakdown. Number one, Asians, $239,430 in gained wealth, in gained value. Hispanics, $162,150 in gained value. White, $138,430 in gained value. Black, $115,430 in gained value. All right. Now, when you look at the numbers, like I was saying before, when you look at the numbers, you will always see that these other ethnicities, these other minorities, they're always without fail better off than black citizens. But these politicians be giving you all lives matter policies when they talk about repairing damages that were done. This is why we need reparations, okay? This is why we are demanding our reparations, okay? Because it's the fact that they gained all of that head start when it came to slavery, and then they still implemented barriers and obstacles and things that held us back, anchors that held us back, things that restricted us, while subsidizing white wealth and other wealth of other ethnic groups. All right, giving other ethnic groups reparations. Okay, Asians getting reparations, getting other ethnic groups reparations and set asides and benefits. This is why we're demanding reparations. All right. So I'll be damned if somebody say, well, why don't y'all just get a job and buy a house and be good citizens? The cities with the largest wealth gains for middle-income homeowners. Not surprisingly, California cities occupied the top spots when it comes to the biggest increase in home value for middle-income families over the last decade. San Jose, California, 642,760 in gain value. Santa Cruz, California, 527,790 in gain value. All right. San Francisco, California, 444,530 in gain value. Salinas, California, 407,880 in gain value. Santa Maria, California, 370,190 in gain value. All right. Now, all of this is happening, and they're gentrifying the hell out of California. There's only a handful of black people who even live in California anymore. All right. And then live in California can afford to live in California. There's a huge homeless epidemic going on with the black people in California. All right. Why it matters. The ability to build wealth is not only an important part of providing financial stability, but also for the economy as a whole. Home equity and retirement accounts make up only 60% of a household's net worth, according to the U.S. Census Bureau and the NRA. Over the past 3 years alone, homeowners gained hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity as home values skyrocketed during the pandemic. Wealth that can be tapped with a home equity loan. And remember, we were talking about the home equity loans and everything like that. That's the what did we just say? Collateral. That's kind of what we were just talking about. All right. Or line of credit if needed for an emergency. All right. Home ownership can also help establish better financial habits as well. The monthly payments made toward your mortgage function as an automatic savings mechanism. Each time you pay, your debt goes down and you gain more equity in your home. This is wealth that grows over time and can eventually be used in a number of different ways. All right. So that's the end of that as well too. So I'm showing this to show you, and we've been on talking about all of this because we have to understand. I wanted to show you some of the studies that were done to show this. All right. So when black people left the plantation in the 1865, okay, after slavery technically ended, and when black people were going off, building their homes, started to gain wealth, the property started to rise because there was black people building homes, black people building schools, black people having businesses, all of that stuff in the same neighborhood. All of that stuff started to gain wealth. All of that stuff cycles with each other, okay? So all of that stuff together, when you have a house, you have houses in neighborhoods. When you have schools in neighborhoods, when you have businesses in neighborhoods, community centers, all of that stuff raises the value of that neighborhood. So when black people started gaining wealth, bam, the KKK will come, burn the stuff down, lynch the people, run the people out. A lot of people would fight back against that stuff. And then you would have flooding that would be happening. Then you would have eminent domain that would be happening. Then you would have massacres that would happen. All right. So you will have a lot of that stuff happening. Soon after that, going into the 90s, then you would have the Great Depression. Like the 1930s. when the Great Depression happened, which is really one of the big reasons why Roosevelt became president anyway, because Hoover was president at the time, and the Great Depression made a lot of Americans mad at Hoover. And that's when Roosevelt came like, hey, I got a plan. Y'all don't want Hoover to win, right? I got a plan. I'm cool. I got it. It's the same energy to a degree why Joe Biden won over Trump. Because when a country is really in a bad position right before the election, people look at the president and say, hey, we need somebody else. We got to get somebody else. You don't know what you're doing. Clearly, we're in this bad position. This is when the pandemic was happening, and then you had the George Floyd uprisings happening at the same time under Trump's administration. That made Trump look really, really bad. And then Joe Biden came, oh, I got the solution. Oh, vote for me. I'm going to fix everything. Everything's going to be fixed if you vote for me. So Joe Biden had the same energy that Roosevelt had during the Great Depression. That's kind of a lot of the ways presidents work. All right. I'm just, segueing a little bit. So during that time, a bunch of people, because the Great Depression lasted, they say they lasted from it started in 1929. All right, not really even 1930, but the Great Depression started really in 1929. All right, and it ended, and some people say in 1938, 39, I mean, or to a degree, some people argue it lasted into the 1941. It lasted into 1941, right? So during this time, Hoover was, nobody liked Hoover. Then Roosevelt, he came in the early 1930s with the New Deal. With the New Deal, that created all these little departments, the HOLC, the FHA, all of these different departments that was like, okay, you guys are going to give federal loans and stuff like that. You guys are going to help all these citizens. So what they would do is like, okay, we're going to help the citizens, the white ones. We're going to help the white citizens. So that's when they started to, give public aid. What they were doing was a lot of construction was going on, because during the Great Depression, there was none of that going on, right? So a lot of construction was going on. During the Great Depression, was a lot of banks that were closing. So a lot of that stuff, they were refinancing and subsidizing the banks. They were getting, banks were coming back and all that stuff. So a lot of that stuff, the New Deal was helping that stuff out to a degree. They were giving pretty much welfare to a degree. While they blame black people for welfare, they were giving out welfare to white citizens. All right. They were helping them with their businesses, helping them with their finances, put food on the table, helping them with their housing and everything. They were building public housing for white people. Okay. Subdivisions for white people, while they were also building houses too. They were building houses and they were putting white people in those houses. Right. So all of that stuff was going on at that time too. Mind you, during all of this stuff, you had a lot of black people, a lot of black men, because this was when World War II was going on in the 1940s. So you had a lot of black men who were going overseas and fighting World War II, right? So when they were coming back, when Roosevelt signed the GI Bill, and I'm doing all of this in a chronological order so we can understand. Roosevelt was doing the GI Bill. So Roosevelt was all like, okay, all of the soldiers coming back, this is what you get as a reward for fighting in World War II. All right, cool. But the thing is that white soldiers were getting that. Black soldiers were not getting that. All right. So they had a lot of white people were getting help from the government on the end of the New Deal, from the benefits of the New Deal. And then the soldiers were coming back. They were getting the benefits from the government from the GI Bill. So you had the New Deal and the FHA and the HOLC helping out white people, saying with the exception, we're going to help white people, but we will not help black people. We will help you and we will help contractors and different investors if you make a deal not to do that for black people. If you make a deal not to help any black people at all. They were like, fine, you say less, cool. And they were all in on it, right? So, and this was when redlining was going on. So when black people were trying to get up on their feet and trying to get a house, they was like, sorry, you're gonna default. Sorry, you can't live in the nice neighborhoods. and you're going to default. So they weren't getting anything. All right. So it was kind of hard for black people to be homeowners at this time. Well, they were making it super easy. They were just giving houses essentially to white people. All right. So during this time, this is like, and this was going on 1940s, 1950s and all that stuff. This is when a lot of this tension was going on for leading up to the civil rights movement. All right. We know the civil rights movement popped off in the 60s, but the civil rights tension was being built up way before then. All right. So going into the civil rights movement, this is what Dr. King was talking about. Be all like, hey, you guys are saying separate but equal, but you're giving resources. The federal, state, and local government is giving resources to these white neighborhoods to make sure these neighborhoods stay afloat, to make sure they have the upper hand, on top of the fact that they have generational wealth, on top of the fact that they have white privilege as well too, and we live in a system of white supremacy. All right, you're saying separate but equal, but you're restricting black people. There's no data to support it, but you're restricting black people from getting mortgages. You're restricting black people from living in these neighborhoods. You're restricting them for getting certain jobs and positions where the first fired, the last hired, the first fired. All right. You know, we're getting the worst positions, the heavy labor positions. They're getting the supervisor position. So this is what Dr. King was about. This is what originally was the kind of agenda that the civil rights movement was on in the first place. Now it got derailed and turned into, you know, the integration thing, because they was all like, okay, well, instead of separate but equal, we'll just take these barriers down and you can live in the white neighborhoods. So it kind of got derailed into that, you know, but that's what the original thing was about too. Now, later on, towards the mid to late 60s, Dr. King learned his lesson and he stopped preaching about integration. He was all like, you know what? Okay, well, I led my people into a burning building because I was deceived into thinking that, okay, integration, that can solve the problem too, because we know you're not going to withdraw funding from the white neighborhoods. We know you're not going to do that. So if we live with them, we're going to get the funding too. That's kind of what the energy was a little bit. And if we live with them, that unfortunately, a lot of them were thinking, if we live with them, living with them and them kind of seeing us and stuff like that, and being within a living facility with us, they won't have this sense of superiority. So it will lower what they were thinking, because they didn't understand white supremacy, but it will lower the racial tension, right? So that's what they were thinking. Didn't work, but that's a lot of what the dominant society misled the civil rights generation into believing, right? So that happened. They assassinated Dr. King on April 4th, 1968. In 1 week after that, black people were turning up. Okay, they called that Holy Week. It happened literally 1 week, one single week. Okay, so during that time, black people all over the place just turning up after they assassinated Dr. King. So within the 1 week, they passed the Fair Housing Act. All right. So after that, there was still discrimination going on, but black people were not legally restricted from getting houses in certain places. So you had black home ownership that started to go up, and, you know, stuff like that started to happen. All right. Meanwhile, too, when you put black people in these housing projects for such a long time, all right, you don't take care of the housing projects. You restrict black people from working in certain jobs. You keep black people poor. When all of these things are going on, it makes it difficult. Even when you stop redlining, you've already given these people such a good boost. They're already laps around. They already got a head start. So when you remove the anchor that you put on black people's ankles, And you say, okay, well, the anchor is gone, so there's nothing restricting you. Okay, but you're not going to factor in the fact that you've had this anchor on me and allow my white counterpart to run 3-4 laps. They have 3-4 laps of generational wealth, and we don't have that. And now you're saying, okay, y'all can have generational wealth too. Not really, but y'all can have generational wealth too. But they didn't do anything to create justice. They didn't do anything compensatory to create justice for the fact that they allowed white people to get this so much farther ahead than black society. All right. So a lot of this stuff was going on, and you can also imagine the fact that the crack epidemic, this happened really due to Nixon and all. I already did a video on the crack epidemic, so I'm not really going to go into it, but a lot of, Nixon and, all that stuff was going on too. So you had black people going to jail. This is when Joe Biden was doing his thing with, okay, lock them up. So you had a lot of them. The government was making money locking black people up. Okay. Nixon, Roosevelt, all that stuff, Clinton, all of that. They were just locking black people up, taking that stuff away. All right. They were making it very difficult to reintegrate to society after coming back from prison, if they were coming back from prison. All right. So a lot of this stuff happened. A lot of this stuff started happening. This was around, and we're not going to get too into this, but this was around the time when they were taking the gang leaders out of the gangs that started organizing a lot of the gangs, and they were letting the street hustlers just kind of do their thing. So they allowed the deprivation of they allowed and promoted, okay, because they put the crack in the community. They put that in there. They like with Cabrini Green, and I bring that up often because that's a really, really big example. They put that stuff in the community and allowed and let it get destroyed. Okay, let it the word is slipping my tongue, but they neglected it to the point where the value was completely gone. All right. Not only that, they deliberately, like, okay, you want to live here, you want to apply for this, you can't be married. They were allowing, it was a lot of stuff going on at that time. Then mass incarceration, it was a lot of stuff going on at that time. So during that time, that led to major loss of black wealth around that time as well too. All right. So this stuff happened with housing projects that were just completely run down. They were not even safe to live at this time. This was around like the early 2000s, right? So around the early 2000s, they were like, okay, well, we're going to destroy these housing projects, and we're going to build better houses. We're going to build houses for you all. Okay, these housing projects that were holding 200-300 people in one building that we're not taking care of. There's lights flickering in the hallway. The elevators don't work. The faucets turn on and off. There's no heating and all that stuff. They're allowing drug dealing in the bill. All of that stuff. We're not going to do that anymore. So we're going to take these houses down. So around the early 2000s, they started destroying, like for instance, Cabrini Green. They started destroying that stuff in the early 2000s, saying we're going to do something afterwards, and they never did anything. So a lot of black people, they were moved from different, okay, after public housing. All right. So that's when a lot of black people, they started, going with getting housing trying to get housing vouchers, living with different parents and stuff like that. That's why around this time, when they building housing after destroying that, around this time, that's when like the housing bubble happened. So around this time, you had a lot of poor people, and this is why we're walking this through. So you had a lot of poor people who they're taking the projects away. So they're removing the projects. They're coming out of the projects to a degree. They're still projects, but I'm talking about the big, like Cabrini Green, the 100-story project building. They're taking those projects away, right? And then they're saying, okay, well, now they're opening up houses for people, but there's a lot of poor people. All right. So this is the time leading up in the early 2000s, leading up to the 2008 housing crisis. So this is when a lot of the banks, they were doing predatory lending, and they started lending a lot of mortgages. They started signing off mortgages. They were like, I don't care about your finances. Just here's a house. Like, oh, okay, I got a house now. But they don't have the finances to keep up with the mortgage, and the banks knew that. The banks had things in the fine print, was all like, oh, you pay this much money, whatever you can afford, you pay this much money right now, but bam, in 6 months from now, is going to double. So they were doing a lot of that stuff. And then around 2008, 2000, really, it started really in 2007, where the rate of default started really spiking, and then foreclosure started really spiking in 2007. I mean, and through 2008, that's when it just like went all to hell. So business, a whole bunch of lenders started pulling out. A whole bunch of corporations started pulling out from the mortgage bundles that the bank were selling to people, right? The insurance companies, they couldn't afford to help nobody because everybody was coming to them at the same time trying to get their policy. Like, hey, I just foreclosed on this house. Let me get something. Now they would have it. But the thing is that if, for instance, and this is how banks and insurance companies work. For instance, right, if somebody gives me $500 and say, okay, this is I'm the bank, I'm holding somebody's $500. More than likely, you as somebody who's put your money in the bank, more than likely, most people don't take all of their money out of the bank at the same time. So more than likely, if you have $500 in the bank, you go to the bank, you're only taking out, I'm gonna take out 50, I'm gonna take out $100, I might take out $200 or $300. More than likely, there's not going to be too often where you're going to take out every dime you have out the bank. And even if you do, it's okay, because we'll have that. Because the thing is, the banks, the second you put the money in, they take the money, they use it. They use your money. But the thing is, the bank has enough money stored, so the little bit of money you do ask, the bank has. So if you, for instance, if you give me $500 and I spend that $500, I'm making money, I'm giving loans, I'm spending I'm investing, I'm doing a whole bunch with your $500. And then when you come and ask me for 20, oh yeah, I got the 20. But if you were to ask me for $500, hey, I don't have the 500. But the thing is, I'm spending it knowing, we're having the assumption you're not going to ever ask me for the $500 at one time anyway. So they were like, okay, like that. So insurance companies were like that too. So they were giving out crazy policies, knowing that they can't afford all of the people on these policies, but they were all like, what is the rate that everybody is going to come for their policy at the same time? That's not going to happen. And banks were like that too. They spend money with the assumption that all of the people that we're getting money from, they're not going to come at the same time and pull their money back. That's why a lot of banks were closed down. That's why a lot of banks started being closed down during the Great Depression, because when people saw that the country was going through economic crisis, everybody would run to the bank and pull their money out. Because the thing is that if you didn't run to the bank and pull your money out of the bank and the bank closed, all of the money you had in the bank, it was just gone. That's what would happen to the Freedmen Bank. Black people had their own bank, and when the bank closed, all of the money you had, $1,000, which back then was a lot of money, you had $1,000 in the bank. If the bank closed, you're just gone. Your $1,000 is just gone. So if somebody had a thing where like, okay, this bank is going to close, people would rush to the bank to get their money out. All right. So that would have a lot of banks closing. So the same energy, and I'm saying this to let you know, the same energy would happen with the insurance companies. So the insurance companies weren't able to afford all of the policies that they were dishing out because they were greedy and they had their hands in the dirty money too. So they just crashed. So they were crashing. Investments, the investors weren't making the money, so they were just pulling their investments out of a lot of stuff. Corporations, they were pulling their money out of a lot of stuff. They were there was a lot of downsizing in businesses. So what they would do is they would you know, lay people off, close down shops, close down hours, business hours, all of that stuff. All right. So this is when a lot of black people, they were losing their houses that they were just getting coming out of the projects because they didn't have any money. This is when Obama came. And this is, well, I forget the name, the name of the president. I forget the name of the president before Obama, but remember what I was saying when it came to Hoover and Roosevelt. When it came to, let me look. I can't believe. Let me see. I can't believe I forgot his name. President before Obama. Let me see. Obama. George W. Bush. I cannot believe I forgot. Yeah, thank you, y'all. Thank you. George W. Bush. Anyway, he's an idiot. Anyway, thank you. I'll see you. So people didn't like what Bush did. Now remember, this is how America works, right? America works. If right before an election, if the country is going through some crisis, people look and blame the president. This is what happened with Hoover with the Great Depression. This is what happened with W. Bush during the housing crisis. And this is what happened with Donald Trump during the pandemic. These are just three very popular examples of what's happening during that time. And then when somebody else comes up, like Roosevelt, like Obama, or like Joe Biden, they come up and they're all like, hey, look at what your president is doing. He's running again. You sure you want him to run this? He's not fit to be president. I'm fit to be president. I got the solution. So, and plus Obama, black people like, oh, the first black president, we got to vote for him. Oh my God, he's so great. So they voted for Obama, and Obama came in and he bailed out a lot of the banks that were crashing because of all of the subprime mortgages and the predatory lending that they were signing off so they could get money. So he just gave them money, and there was other smaller programs to help people who were, who foreclosed on their housing, to help them get up off their feet, but not nearly enough. All right. He was spending, it was like 800 billion. All right. To bail out different banks and organizations and companies and all that stuff. And not nearly enough went to the black people who had their houses crashed. Now, black people did kind of start to recover a little bit. But when black people, now mind you, there's been white people who've been had wealth. So white wealth is just going up here. So white wealth is up here. Black wealth is up here. All right. So then when the housing crisis crashed, they both went down, but white wealth went down, black wealth went down like right here, right? So then when things started to get a little bit more stable, white wealth is still up here, right? So this stuff leads together. Their wealth is still growing at a faster rate than our wealth is, right? So then the pandemic happened. So with the pandemic happening, businesses and all that stuff, a lot of black businesses started to close down as well too. So all of this stuff is a factor in why we have such a huge disparity between the black and white and black and everybody else. Because all of these other buffer classes, they have a higher wealth rate than we do as foundational black Americans. So this is why a lot of the disparities is going on. All right. This is why when somebody says, why don't we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps? Why don't we just work hard? Stop having this victim mentality. Just do better. this is why we all like, hey man, no, cut the exactly like Sister Lillian says, cut the check, cut the damn check. All right, this is why we're not taking no for an answer. All right, this is why we're saying we're not voting with nobody without tangibles. All right, we voted for Obama without tangibles off the fact that, hey, he black, that's cool, he's black, and he's talking like, hey, wink wink, black people, I got you, I'm from Chicago, I got you, I know what it is, I got you. When you get in, everybody else is getting money, we're not getting nothing. He's calling us thugs when we're protesting for Trayvon Martin. He's calling us thugs. He's signed in Blue Lives Matter legislation to show his support for the police that was lynching black people. All right, we voted for him without tangibles, and we got our asses kicked because of that. So with that, we kind of learned. So then when he was all like, yo, vote for Hillary or else that would be a disrespect to my legacy, we like, hell no. That's a big reason why the black turnout was so low and Trump won. All right, so then with that, then a lot of stuff happened with the Trump thing, which was, and I keep bringing up, when a president is in, when a country is in crisis, especially right before an election season, that looks really bad for the what's the term? The sitting president, the sitting official. There's a term for that. I'm forgetting the term. Okay, but it looks really bad for the sitting president at the time. It looked really bad for Trump at the time. So you had a lot of people who voted for Trump in 2016 who were all like, oh, I'm not voting for Trump in 2020. Look what's going on with the pandemic. Look what's going on with the black uprising. I'm not voting for him then. All right. So that was making Biden look really good at that time. Then you had a lot of the mail-in ballots, and you had all that stuff. You know what I'm saying? So incumbent. Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate you. The incumbent. So just like with Hoover and Roosevelt, just like with W. Bush and Obama, just like with Trump and Biden, the incumbent looks really bad. So that's one of the reasons. All right. Now, this is why when it comes to the black vote now, Joe Biden is trying to do a whole bunch of stuff to rally a lot of the black vote right now, because he knows gas prices is crazy right now. He is been crazy ever since the war in Ukraine, which ain't had nothing to do with America, but Joe Biden was all like, you know what? We have to save Ukraine. Ukraine is a priority. Screw America. So he sent billions of dollars to Ukraine, and we paid the cost for that. He put sanctions on Russia, and they was like, yeah, just billions. We don't have enough money. Just give them money to Ukraine, give money to Afghanistan, pull all the soldiers out at one time. The Taliban took over, Afghanistan. All of that stuff happened at the same time. Oh, forced shots, if we can say that, force all this. So it's a lot of stuff going on. The economy's real bad right now. Police still doing what he hasn't fixed any problem at all. So he knows that his support pretty much from a lot of people, not just black people, but especially black people, because it was only really the black vote that got him over the hump to beat Trump anyway. All right. So he knows if he has to face Trump again, he needs that black vote. And, just like with Trump before, if the economy's looking real bad, if the country's looking real bad, and everybody's looking at the incumbent, and they all like, hey, I'm not going to lie, man, you doing a worse job than Trump, so maybe Trump is better than you. So now he's trying to appease the black vote with a bunch of symbolism, like the Emmett Till statue, Juneteenth, all of this stuff. All right. Or opening an investigation on the police department, and all, just giving you stuff to say, hey, something is happening. We're moving the needle forward. Don't say, even if it's slow, it might be slow. It might move at a snail's pace, but it's moving. Vote for me. You know what I'm saying? This is why, and he's trying to create a coalition thing too. This is why, if you want to know why Kamala Harris just came, what hole Kamala Harris crawled out of. He has her she crawled out of some hole so she can appeal to the liberal women about the Roe v. Wade situation. So Kamala Harris is about to watch. Kamala Harris is about to start popping up everywhere, doing a bunch of speeches everywhere, talking about two things. She's going to be talking about the abortion. She's going to be talking about abortion, and she's going to be talking about the thing that they got going on with Ron DeSantis in Florida, was saying that slavery benefited slaves. Slavery benefited black people. You know, we gained some benefit from that, which Biden really don't have a problem with. That's why he's refusing to pay reparations. All right. So we have to be very well aware of that. All right. And understand their tactics and understand our history to know we are going through all of this stuff. Biden needs to cut the check. He not getting a damn thing from black people. I don't care what. I don't care if it's DeSantis. I don't care if it's Trump. I don't care if it's an alien invasion going on and an alien ran for the damn GOP. This is the damn. I don't care if if Lex Luthor came out the damn comic books and said, I'm running for president. Joe Biden's all like, vote for me or Lex Luthor. Come on, he's a villain. I don't care. Lex Luthor is going to be the next president if Joe Biden doesn't cut the check and give tangibles to foundational black Americans. All right. So we're going to be seeing a whole bunch of kryptonite all over the place. And that, hey, oh well. If Lex Luthor tells us he's cutting the check, hey, it's going to be a lot of green. There's going to be green kryptonite. It's going to be green money. That's cool with me. My favorite color is going to be green after that. So it's why it's important for us to know that. Now, I want to thank every single last one of you because we're really recovering from the shadow ban that was going on. Really, really recovering from the shadow ban. So thank every single last one of you all. Thank every single last one of you all for doing that. All right. For liking, sharing, commenting, all of that. Right. Thank everybody for the super chats as well, too. Big shout out. I'm going to just say the names. Big shout out to Iron Will. Big shout out to Ro. Dark Skin Brother 2. Double CM23. John. How do you pronounce your name? Let me see. John Gallery, I believe is far from John, our brother John, and our brother Black Logic. Shout out to all of you all. Shout out to every single last one of you all for being in here. Appreciate every single last one of you all. Also, the links to my social media is in the description below. Pull this up real quick, which is Afro Elite on Instagram and the Afro Elite on Twitter. They're calling it X now, but whatever. It's the same app. So Afro Elite on those social media platforms, and the link to that is in the description below. All right. Make sure you guys subscribe to the content. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. This helps get over the shadow ban when there's a whole bunch of notifications. Also, I post the videos before. I have the videos posted up before so people can hit notify me, because that sends an additional notification. So that really helps take us out of the shadow ban box in category that we're under right now, because we're still under it to a degree, but we're recovering from that. We haven't recovered all the way. We're doing a really fast and good, effective job with that, but we're not all the way out. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's good to hit that notification bell. And when you see this on your timeline, hit the notify me, hit the like beforehand, so the algorithm can doesn't shadow ban this, and hit the notify me, because all of that helps take us out of the shadow ban box that they have us in. All right. Now, with that being said, my brothers and my sisters, B1 salute to every single last one of you all. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for everything you do. And with that being said, B1 salute to every last one of you all. You all have a good one.